Lauren Monroe, director of the FBI, a figure known for precision and control, never imagined her most defining moment would come on the side of a highway with a gun pointed at her face. It was supposed to be a routine drive home. Instead, it became a national reckoning. Pulled over without cause, held at gunpoint by officers who refused to acknowledge her identity, Lauren survived not because of her title, but because someone across the road kept filming. That moment didn't just expose a single act of misconduct. It unraveled a system built to protect silence. In response, Lauren launched the Office of Traffic Justice, a historic civilian-led agency with the power to hold law enforcement accountable nationwide. It's bold, it's unprecedented, and it's already facing backlash. But as Lauren said in her final interview, the system doesn't change because of the truth. It changes when there's nowhere left to hide from it. So stay with us, because what you're about to see isn't just a story of reform, it's a blueprint for resistance. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, because this moment belongs to all of us. FBI, huh? The voice was low, coated in sarcasm. Then came the snap of leather, the shift of weight, and the metallic glint of a gun drawn fast. Too fast. The barrel was now inches from Lauren Monroe's face, steady, deliberate, and held by a man who wasn't flinching. She didn't blink. It wasn't the first time a weapon had been pointed at her, but this time was different. This wasn't a foreign war zone, a hostage standoff, or a cartel sting gone south. This was I-97, an empty stretch of Maryland highway, lit only by flickering sodium lamps and the distant buzz of interstate silence. And the man, holding the gun, wore the uniform of local law enforcement. Lauren Monroe, newly appointed director of the FBI, sat in her government-issued black sedan, both hands raised, palms open, posture calm. Her instincts kicked in before the fear could. She scanned him. Mid-40s, Caucasian, buzz cut, patrolman's build. Officer Thomas Kearns, based on the badge, though he hadn't introduced himself. His face was tight with adrenaline, jaw twitching, breath shallow. She recognized that expression. He was already halfway past the point of control. She'd been driving home from Langley. The briefing had ended late. Internal threats, possible leaks, chatter about federal compromise. Routine by her standards. She hadn't exceeded the speed limit. No tail light out, no lane drift, nothing to warrant this stop. And yet, here she was. A gun trained on her face because her FBI badge wasn't enough. "Step out of the vehicle," Kearns ordered, voice sharp. "No, ma'am. No, please. Just dominance." Lauren didn't move. "You're pointing a firearm at a federal officer," she said evenly. "You need to de-escalate. Now," he snapped, finger tensing against the trigger guard just enough to communicate what came next if she didn't comply. Her eyes didn't leave his. "I'm not reaching for anything. I've already identified myself. What's your probable cause?" Kearns didn't answer. His lips pressed into a line. The gun didn't move. The silence between them crackled. She could hear her heart, but it wasn't racing. It was methodical, steady, like always, in situations where her training took over, and that's when it happened. A flash of memory. Loud, blinding, close. 2 years earlier. Fallujah. Surveillance gone wrong. A secondary agent, Derek Owens, shot dead because Lauren hesitated 3 seconds before ordering breach. 3 seconds waiting for clarity that never came. 3 seconds that changed everything. She delivered the eulogy. She never forgot the clock. And now, here she was again. No clarity, no guarantee, no time. She spoke again, tone lower. "I don't want to escalate this, officer, but you're pointing a loaded weapon at someone whose jurisdiction outranks yours." Kearns's face twisted into a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "FBI don't mean a damn thing out here. You think that badge makes you untouchable? I think it makes me a target, she said flatly. And it did. Lauren had read the internal reports, seen the videos, quietly settled lawsuits, pulled bodies out of unnecessary graves. What she never imagined was becoming the headline herself. The tension between them sat heavy, as thick as humidity before a summer storm. She tracked his hand, still gripped around the firearm. His other hand shifted, resting on the doorframe. No body cam that she could see. And when she glanced at his cruiser behind her, dash lights pulsed, but no dashcam indicator blinked. It was off, deliberately. He had planned this. I'm not stepping out, she said, not louder but firmer. You've given me no lawful order. You're not in protocol, and I'm not playing into your setup. His smirk vanished. This ain't a setup. Then turn on your dashcam, she challenged. Kearns didn't move. That told her everything. Lauren's phone buzzed against the center console. Silent mode. She couldn't reach for it. Any movement, and this would be over. She kept both hands where he could see them. Step out, he said again. Still, she didn't move. She let the silence stretch, testing his patience. Kearns wasn't trained for this. He didn't know how to read her calm as anything other than defiance. That made him dangerous. She knew the statistics. She'd debriefed on cases like this, but the one constant? They didn't end well when the officer had something to prove. He leaned in closer. She could smell coffee on his breath, hear the creak of his belt. The gun was steady, but his confidence was cracking. Why'd you stop me? She asked again. You were swerving, he lied. I've driven 71 miles without a single lane departure. My onboard telematics confirm it. Kearns didn't respond. She watched his jaw pulse. He didn't know who she really was. He hadn't run the plates. Or maybe he had and didn't care. Either way, she had seconds. Seconds before backup arrived, or didn't. Seconds before he pulled the trigger, or didn't. She thought of Owens again. 3 seconds too slow. Not this time. Her breath deepened. Her right foot adjusted, quiet. Her eyes didn't flinch. She was ready to disarm, ready to dive, ready for anything. But before either of them could make their next move, a faint sound cut through the quiet. A second engine. In the distance, a cruiser, maybe backup, or maybe reinforcement. Lauren didn't know yet, but she would, in 3 seconds. She should have called it earlier. That night in Yemen still sat somewhere deep in Lauren Monroe's bones, not as a wound but as a scar, a permanent marker etched into muscle memory. The mission had been routine at first. Extract a local asset suspected of leaking intelligence to foreign operatives. She had led a 4-man team into an apartment complex on the outskirts of Sana'a. The asset had gone dark for 48 hours, but the chatter had picked up, too fast, too unverified. Lauren hesitated, waited for confirmation. 3 seconds. That's all. 3 seconds to cross-check satellite imagery that turned out to be outdated. 3 seconds to demand one more verbal code from their source. That pause, measured, cautious, procedural, cost Derek Owens his life. The sniper had been waiting on the roof across the alley. The first shot shattered his shoulder. The second took him through the throat. She heard the gurgle over comms. She never forgave herself for those 3 seconds. Now, back on that Maryland highway with a gun pointed at her face and no legal justification for this stop, Lauren felt every nerve recalibrating. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misread ID or a routine protocol check. It was something else, calculated, designed to intimidate, maybe provoke. The moment Officer Thomas Kearns had drawn his weapon despite her identification, she recognized it for what it was. Control, not compliance. And she wasn't about to let him take those seconds from her again. She spoke low, steady, projecting calm while her mind raced through possible moves. If you're detaining me, you need to articulate the charge. Otherwise, This is an unlawful stop and a violation of Title 18. Kearns didn't respond. He just adjusted the grip on his firearm, knuckles whitening. He was waiting for something, waiting for her to panic, waiting for her to flinch. She didn't. The hum of tires approached from behind. Headlights. Then the rhythmic strobe of red and blue. Another patrol unit easing up behind Kearns's cruiser. Lauren's stomach tightened. Backup should have been a relief. Another pair of eyes usually meant a check on reckless behavior, but this wasn't that kind of situation. Her instincts flared hard. Whoever was arriving wasn't there to help, not her. Her eyes didn't leave Kearns, but she angled her head slightly, watching the new arrival in the mirror. A tall, white male officer stepped out of the second vehicle. His silhouette was calm, almost casual. No rush, no urgency, just a long stride forward, right hand resting against the side of his vest. He wasn't here to de-escalate. He was here to reinforce whatever Kearns had started. Lauren's breath slowed. That internal click, the same one she felt just before shots were fired in Fallujah, in Caracas, in Beirut, activated again. She didn't need confirmation anymore. This wasn't random. This was planned. The second officer approached, flanking Kearns with practiced familiarity. He didn't speak to her at first, just glanced at Kearns, then down at her. No nameplate, no body cam light, just cold, blank presence. Lauren spoke before either of them could script a narrative. My credentials are still on the dashboard. FBI Director Lauren Monroe. If either of you continue this without cause, you're violating federal protocol and subject to obstruction charges. Still, neither man acknowledged her words. The second officer leaned toward Kearns and asked, "What's the issue?" Kearns gave a tight, pleased nod. Non-compliant. Suspicious behavior. Lauren didn't laugh. She didn't move. She just held her position and let the words settle like poison. Suspicious behavior. It was the oldest lie in the book, the one that got people killed, the one that let officers rewrite outcomes after the fact, and now she was watching it take shape in real time. The second officer took a step closer to her window. His voice was lower, almost conversational. "Ma'am, we need you to step out of the vehicle." Ma'am. Not director, not even Ms. Monroe. Just ma'am. Stripped of rank, stripped of identity. Lauren's fingers curled slightly on the wheel, not in anger, but preparation. If this escalated further, she needed every muscle to be ready. She looked straight at him. "I will not exit my vehicle without a legal basis for detainment. Produce a reason. State the violation." Again, nothing. Just silence. The kind that carried threat more than any shouted command. Then the second officer shifted his stance. Not closer to her, closer to Kearns. They stood shoulder to shoulder now, forming a wall, blocking view lines, creating a funnel of intimidation. Lauren ran the math. 2 men, no cameras, radio silent. 1 dash cam, off, no backup from her end, and she couldn't reach her phone without risking a violent overreaction. She was boxed in. She needed to disrupt their rhythm, break the momentum. She turned her voice colder, surgical. "I've dealt with arms dealers who blinked faster than you. Do you really think you're the first man to point a gun at me and expect fear in return?" Kearns' jaw ticked. The second officer's hand hovered closer to his belt. "Get out," he said again. She inhaled, just once. Sharp, but not ragged. Then, with deliberate slowness, she released the steering wheel, her hands visible the whole time. She opened the door an inch, enough to satisfy their demand, but not enough to expose herself. "I'm complying," she said. "Under duress. This is being recorded." Lie. But, said with such conviction it might as well be true. She stepped out. The cool air hit her skin. She stood straight, 5'9", not backing down. Kearns stepped forward, positioning himself so the camera in his cruiser couldn't see her. The second officer angled behind her, two-man control positioning. She registered it instantly. They'd done this before. She also knew what came next. But this time, she wouldn't be 3 seconds too late. The silence between the three of them was surgical, heavy with intent. The second officer, Jason Miller, based on the faint stitching visible under his vest, had taken his position without so much as a glance toward Lauren's ID or the situation unfolding. No greeting, no questions, no indication that he was trying to verify anything. His role wasn't to intervene or assess. He was here to reinforce Kearns's presence, not to challenge it. Lauren caught it in the way he positioned his feet, one slightly forward, weight distributed for stability but angled behind her rather than beside, a maneuver designed to limit her movement if she tried to flee or resist. It was the kind of formation used in tactical takedowns, not traffic stops, and certainly not against someone who had already identified herself as a federal official. She hadn't missed the dash cam either. When she exited her vehicle, the lens on Kearns's cruiser should have been fixed, glowing faint red to indicate active recording. But it remained dark. No light, no movement. It had been deactivated, not accidentally, not overlooked, deliberately. Miller's cruiser had one too, but its placement and distance made it clear that Kearns's body shielded the interaction. No body cams visible, no accountability present. They had created a dead zone. Lauren's eyes swept the shoulder of the road. Nothing but asphalt and low brush. No cameras, no traffic, not even the hum of distant engines. She had left Langley thinking of internal leak protocols. Now she stood on the side of an empty road with two officers forming a textbook two-man containment strategy. One in front to dominate, one behind to neutralize movement. She adjusted her stance just slightly. Weight on her heels, not toes. Back foot braced, body turned 3/4, enough to maintain visibility on both men. Her voice, when it came, was lower than before. Not calm, not tense, surgical. "Officer Miller, are you aware of the reason for this stop?" Miller didn't answer. His eyes flicked to Kearns, then away. Lauren shifted her focus. "Because I am. There is no reason. This is power, not protocol. I hope you're prepared to explain that in front of internal affairs." Still nothing. It was confirmation. Not that they were rogue. Worse. They believed they were protected, that nothing would come of this, that she, like so many before her, would swallow the humiliation to avoid escalation. But they hadn't accounted for one variable. Kearns stepped closer, the gun no longer drawn but still holstered with a tension that made its presence known. Miller remained at her back, just far enough to react first if things turned sideways. Kearns's voice dropped. "We're going to pat you down for weapons." Lauren didn't move. "You have no legal grounds." He tilted his head. "Refusing a search? That sounds like resistance." She stared at him. No blink, no shift. "I have the right to deny a warrantless search. That's not resistance. That's the Constitution. Constitution doesn't mean much when you're standing alone on a dark road." Lauren exhaled once. Controlled. "Maybe not, but it's going to mean everything when you're explaining this to a federal grand jury." Kearns smiled, but it was brittle. He stepped in again, enough that she could see the thin scar under his left eye, the kind that came from street brawls, not combat. His hand hovered near his belt again, not quite reaching for the weapon, but letting her know it was there. Miller stayed silent, now forming the full trap. She knew the next play. It would be an escalation, manufactured, a claim that she was being uncooperative, a slight grab, a reaction. Then they'd have cause. They would say she was resisting. And once that label stuck, it didn't matter who you were, badge or not, title or not. Lauren considered her options. Fight and risk violence, comply and risk precedent. There was no safe path forward. "I will not resist," she said, voice even, "but I will not consent." Kearns didn't care. He reached out anyway, grabbing her left wrist without warning. The grip was tight, too tight for protocol, designed not to restrain but to dominate. Her voice cracked out instantly. "You're hurting me. That is excessive force. I have not resisted. I have not moved. You are in violation." Miller moved closer. Lauren's pulse climbed, not in panic but preparation. Her right arm tensed. She could dislocate Kearns's thumb in half a second, break the hold, drop him before Miller reacted. But doing so would make her the aggressor, and she knew how that narrative ended. She bit back the impulse. Kearns twisted slightly. "She's resisting," he called out. Miller's hand dropped to his own side. Not his firearm, his radio. "We have a non-compliant subject," Miller began. Subject, not director, not agent, not citizen. Subject. It was the first real danger signal. Lauren's entire body aligned behind a single realization. They were rewriting her, in real time. And if she didn't take control of the moment, the story being built would be the only one that survived. Then she did something small, but intentional. She raised her voice. "My name is Lauren Monroe. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is an illegal detainment. Both dash cams are deactivated. You have not stated probable cause. I am not armed. I am not resisting. This is a civil rights violation." Her voice rang out sharp and unmistakable in the night air. Miller hesitated, not for long, but just enough. That was when Kearns's hand twitched again. Lauren saw it. He was about to unclip his holster. She braced. Her instincts screamed. But before anything else could happen, something unexpected pierced the moment. A shout from the shadows. Clear, loud, unshaken. "Hey, I'm recording this!" A voice neither of them had prepared for. The voice from the darkness momentarily stalled them. Kearns didn't turn, but his hand froze. Miller's head shifted slightly, just enough to register the threat, the unknown observer now casting an invisible camera across the scene. Lauren didn't flinch. She didn't move. She let the weight of the moment settle back on the men who were used to controlling the narrative. For the first time, they had to consider that someone else was watching, and that someone might just know what they were looking at. Lauren spoke before either officer could reclaim the tempo. "I'm invoking my right to know the basis for my detainment. State your legal justification." Her voice had the cadence of someone trained to deconstruct threats, not panic over them. It wasn't volume that mattered, it was clarity. Precision was power. Miller stayed silent, still half turned toward the voice from the shadows. Kearns, however, reacted. The grip on Lauren's wrist tightened, shifting from control to punishment. His fingers dug into bone, wrist bones grinding under the pressure. "You think a phone's gonna change what's happening here?" he muttered under his breath, low enough to evade the camera but loud enough for her to hear. "I think it already has," Lauren replied. He didn't like that. In one sudden motion, Kearns twisted her arm outward, forcing her body to pivot. Pain lanced up through her elbow, but she didn't cry out. Instead, she adjusted her footing, dropped her shoulder slightly to absorb the torque, and steadied herself. Her training was kicking in, not to fight, but to remain composed under duress, to remain legible on camera. "You're being non-compliant," Kearns said loudly, projecting for the potential recording. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Lauren countered, still loud enough for the unseen witness to hear. "I am verbally complying while requesting legal grounds for my detainment. That is not resistance under federal or state statute." Her wrist throbbed. A lesser person might have gone to the ground by now. That was the point, she realized. Kearns was escalating for the visual. He wanted a reaction he could justify. A flinch, a shove, anything that would allow him to cross the line. But she wasn't giving him that. Behind them, Miller's posture shifted. He moved one step back and to the side, keeping a wide stance. It was subtle, but she caught it. He was making room, anticipating a takedown, preparing to clear a path. Lauren adjusted again, this time standing straighter, arms visible, voice cutting through the night air like a scalpel. "You are using excessive force against a federal agent. I am unarmed. I have shown no aggression. You are being recorded. Stand down." Kearns leaned in, breath hot near her ear. "Shut your mouth." "I will not," she said without hesitation. He pushed her arm again, this time higher, trying to force compliance through pain. Her shoulder locked, but she didn't let it buckle. "Last warning," he snapped. "You've given no first warning," she replied, her voice colder now. "You've only issued threats." He didn't reply. Instead, he did what she feared most. His hand dropped to his holster. She saw the snap come undone. The loop lifted. The gun was coming out. Time slowed, but not the way people described it in stories. There was no cinematic drift, no echoing heartbeat, just raw math. The distance, the angle, the pressure, her own breathing, and Miller's distance behind her. Lauren knew, instantly, that if she moved now, if she ducked or pivoted, it would be construed as an attack. Kearns was setting the stage for a shoot. "Don't," she said, her tone no longer calm or diplomatic. It was a warning, not a plea, but it didn't stop him. Kearns drew his weapon with practiced ease, the barrel rising until it met her line of sight. His hand was steady now, locked in the kind of rigid certainty born from adrenaline, fear, and belief in his own immunity. Her hands rose instinctively, palms out, but her expression never changed. "You just made a fatal mistake," she said. "Do you feel powerful now?" Kearns asked mockingly. It wasn't a real question. He wasn't interested in an answer. It was performance. For the camera he knew existed but couldn't see. For himself. For the other officer who still hadn't spoken. And perhaps, most dangerously, for no one at all. Power for the sake of power. Lauren could taste it now. What so many others must have felt before the trigger was pulled. That sense of helplessness wrapped in indignity. The grotesque inversion of the law being weaponized by the people sworn to uphold it. She could hear the voice in her head, Owens's voice, screaming across a crackled comms channel. "Move! Don't freeze!" She wanted to move. Everything in her body said to act, disarm, deflect, survive. But she also knew how it would be reported. A federal agent lunging, an officer defending himself. The gun stayed up. Miller still hadn't spoken. Then Lauren noticed something else. The grip on the weapon wasn't just confident. It was forced. Kearns's hand trembled at the edge, not from weakness, from calculation. He was no longer in control. He was stalling, trying to figure out how to exit the moment without losing face. And then it happened. A beam of light cut across the scene. Not headlights, not patrol lights. A phone flashlight. The voice from the roadside stepped forward, unseen until now. A man, civilian clothes, calm face. He lifted his phone higher. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" he asked. His voice was smooth but firm, the kind of tone people use when they know what they're saying is being recorded. Kearns didn't lower the weapon, but he didn't fire. The decision froze in midair. Lauren saw the shift in power. For the first time, they weren't alone. The Glock in Kearns' hand quivered just enough to betray the adrenaline surging through his veins. Lauren's eyes stayed locked on the barrel, steady, expressionless, reading the distance, the weight distribution, the likelihood that his finger would slip before reason caught up. She had seen this look before. not just in men with guns, but in people who believed they were the only authority in the room. His breathing was shallow now, nostrils flaring, eyes unblinking, mouth drawn into a tight, defensive line. The silence was brutal. No one moved. Miller stood a few feet behind her, visibly unsure whether to draw, speak, or stay silent. His posture had shifted from dominant to watchful. His hand hovered near his sidearm, but he didn't unclip the holster. Kearns had taken the lead, and now he was the problem Miller didn't know how to solve. Lauren stood still, her hands raised, the cold air cutting across her exposed wrists. Her left shoulder still ached from the earlier torque, but she didn't adjust her stance. Every motion mattered now. Every inch of movement was evidence. It would be studied, slowed down, frame by frame if this ended the way so many encounters like this had. She focused on the weapon again. The Glock 22, standard issue. For .40 caliber, no external safety. Once drawn, it was only discipline that kept it from firing, and Kearns had none. "You think you're in control?" he asked, voice low and defensive. Lauren didn't answer. Control was no longer the question. It was survival. It was containment. She felt her jaw tighten. Then, unbidden, a flash of memory returned. A man in a navy hoodie slumped against a rusted chain-link fence, unarmed. Shot 3 times by a state trooper who claimed he reached. Lauren had investigated the internal file. The footage had been corrupted. No civilian video, no body cam. The department ruled it within protocol. The officer was promoted a year later. Another case, a 17-year-old in Chicago, wrong place, wrong time, ran when told not to, shot in the back. The officer claimed fear. No recording, no charges. There were more. She remembered their names, their families, the files stamped "closed" across the cover sheets. This time she wasn't behind a desk. She was the one in the frame, and that camera from the roadside might be the only thing standing between her and a 1-paragraph press release about a tragic misunderstanding. She leveled her voice. "Officer, you're aiming a loaded weapon at an unarmed federal agent. Put it down. Now." Kearns didn't flinch, but the tremble in his hand increased. "I said, do you feel powerful now?" he repeated, like the question meant something, like it was supposed to matter. Lauren's voice dropped to a whisper, just loud enough for him to hear. "You don't look powerful. You look scared." The air between them thickened. Her words weren't meant to provoke. They were diagnostic. She was watching for the twitch. The moment the power fantasy cracked into panic. She didn't see it yet, but it was close. Kearns didn't respond. He kept the gun trained to center mass, just above her sternum now. Too low for a warning shot. Too high for a non-lethal one. She could tell from the way his forearm tightened that he had never fired at someone who didn't shoot back. He wasn't a soldier. He was a man clinging to authority in a situation spiraling too fast. Then it came. A beam of artificial light sliced across the roadside. It wasn't bright, but it was focused. A phone camera. Steady. A civilian now standing a few feet off the shoulder, phone raised, body positioned for a clean frame. He was calm, composed, and filming everything. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" the man called out. The question hung like a warning bell. Kearns didn't turn his head, but the twitch was there, a ripple in his control. Lauren watched it happen in real time. The man who believed he was untouchable now had a witness he couldn't intimidate and a recording he couldn't erase. The angle was good. The light was catching his face, the gun, her hands, everything. Still, he didn't lower the weapon. Behind her, Miller finally spoke. "Tom," he said quietly, "we've got a camera." Kearns didn't answer. Lauren could see the battle happening behind his eyes. He wanted to stay in command, to prove something. But the moment was shifting out from under him, slipping away like sand between clenched fists, and he didn't have the language to navigate that loss. Lauren didn't lower her voice. "Put it down," she repeated. "Every second you stay like this is another second you'll have to explain in court." A breath, a long one. Kearns's hand didn't drop, but his stance shifted. Slightly, his left foot stepped back. It wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. Then, from his radio, a crackle. "Unit 47, status, dispatch." They were checking in. He didn't answer. The voice on the radio repeated, "Unit 47, confirm location and status." The witness's phone remained steady. Lauren didn't move. Her heart pounded, but not with fear. This wasn't the kind of danger that demanded instinct. It demanded precision. If she moved too fast, he might shoot. If she hesitated too long, she'd lose her window. Then came the final straw. The faint sound of sirens. Distant, but unmistakable. Kearns heard them. So did Miller. Kearns's fingers adjusted around the grip. His breathing changed. He was trying to find a way out. Lauren watched him look past her toward the approaching lights. He wasn't aiming anymore. He was calculating. The phone didn't waver. Its lens, small but unblinking, captured every second with a kind of quiet authority none of the uniforms on that road could match. Andre Brooks stood across the highway, firm, deliberate, holding his ground like someone who had already made peace with what it meant to get involved. He didn't call out again. He didn't need to. The camera was doing all the talking now. Lauren saw it immediately. The change in weight distribution, the subtle panic spreading through Miller's posture. He wasn't built for this type of exposure. He had followed Kearns into the field like it was just another night shift, and now there was an audience. Not a supervisor, not a colleague, a civilian with a phone and enough confidence to challenge armed officers from 30 feet away. That changed the game. Kearns hadn't lowered his weapon, but he wasn't pressing forward anymore. He was waiting, trying to gauge the value of every second. The barrel hung lower now, no longer aimed at Lauren's face but not safely holstered either. It dangled like a threat, half delivered. Then Miller moved. Not much, just 1 foot off his current line, angling toward the shoulder where Andre stood. His left hand hovered near his utility belt. Not the firearm, not the cuffs, lower, near his collapsible baton or his taser. His eyes locked on Andre and his shoulders squared with intention. He was going to shut it down. Lauren reacted instantly. "Don't," she snapped. Miller froze, thrown by the sharpness in her voice. Lauren stepped between them, not physically but verbally. Her tone wasn't elevated, but it struck like a gavel. "Touch him, and I'll have you charged with obstruction of justice, and I'll make it stick." It wasn't a bluff. The way she said it made that clear. Miller hesitated, caught between impulse and instinct. His hand withdrew half an inch from his belt. Lauren didn't blink. "You think a phone's your problem? No. Your problem is that you're on the wrong side of a story that's about to be national." The words landed, not as threat, but as inevitability. Miller stepped back, his arms now slightly raised at his sides, not in surrender. He didn't have the composure for that, but in retreat. Andre held his position, unmoved, phone still recording. Lauren turned slightly, enough to speak toward him without turning her back to the officers. "Keep filming." He nodded once. No words. His face didn't carry fear, just purpose. Then the sirens hit. What had been a distant hum now rolled through the asphalt like a pressure wave. Not one cruiser, multiple. The whine of radios, the rush of high-speed tires on cold pavement, all converging like a wall of authority surging toward a battlefield none of them expected to fight on tonight. Miller stepped farther back. Kearns still hadn't holstered his weapon, but his face was different now. It had lost its righteous burn, replaced by something tighter, more confused. He looked toward the approaching lights, squinting into the flood of white and red. His body shifted into something unfamiliar. Preparation, not aggression. He was thinking of exit strategies. Lauren took one breath, then another. The calculus in her head was relentless. If backup arrived and didn't know who she was, things could spiral all over again. She had seen it happen in other cases. Uniforms responding without context, reacting to the first person they saw moving. She raised both hands higher, clear, and visible. "My name is Director Lauren Monroe," she called out loud, her voice cutting across the road. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am unarmed. I am being unlawfully detained by Officers Kearns and Miller. Both dash cams are deactivated. Civilian is recording. I am not resisting." The declaration wasn't for Kearns. It was for the radios now crackling with her location. The first cruiser came into full view, lights flaring, tires screeching to a halt, then another, then two more behind it. Doors opened in sequence. Lauren didn't move. Andre kept recording. Kearns finally lowered the weapon. Not holstered, just down. His head turned slowly toward Miller, then toward the newest arrivals. His chest rose once, hard, like a man bracing for impact. Miller took another step away from Lauren. Not toward Kearns, not toward Andre, just away, out of formation. Lauren felt the balance of power begin to shift again. It was small at first, like the subtle tilt before it topples. The unspoken realization that control wasn't just about who had the badge or the gun, it was about who had the truth. And right now, the truth was being recorded by a bystander, announced by a woman with a federal title, and witnessed by an entire response unit arriving with their sirens still wailing. Then came the moment she'd been waiting for. The car doors slammed shut behind the arriving officers. The first one out, a lieutenant by the bars on his collar, stepped forward, eyes scanning quickly. His gaze locked on Lauren's raised hands, her stance, then dropped to the weapon still in Kearns's grip. It took him less than 3 seconds. "Director Monroe?" he called out, half confirmation, half disbelief. Lauren didn't drop her hands. "Yes, these officers need to be disarmed and removed from the scene immediately." Behind her, Miller's head snapped toward the lieutenant. Kearns stood motionless. The lieutenant paused. His expression changed. Not shock, recognition. Authority without hesitation. He raised one hand, signaling to his unit. Lauren kept her voice flat. "The man across the road has the entire encounter on video. You might want to start there." The lieutenant didn't answer. Not yet. He just turned and barked one word to the other officers. "Separate." The shift happened fast. 2 officers approached Miller from behind. Another moved in on Kearns. Nobody touched Lauren. For the first time since the night began, she could feel the air expand around her. But the question still lingered. Who exactly had sent backup? The moment Lieutenant Hernandez locked eyes with Lauren, the tension cracked, but it didn't break. He was mid-step, halfway between his cruiser and the tight semicircle forming around the confrontation when he heard her name, saw her face, realized what exactly he had driven into. His boots slowed, his shoulders stiffened, his hand instinctively dropped to his duty belt, not for his weapon, but to anchor himself in the reality unfolding in front of him. "Director Monroe," he said, as if saying it aloud might change the outcome. His voice wasn't uncertain, just caught off guard, like a soldier who'd expected a routine inspection and walked into a tribunal. Lauren kept her hands raised, her posture precise, her voice steady. "Yes," she said, "you need to take control of this scene. Disarm and detain both officers. Now." She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Hernandez's eyes flicked down. First to her, then to Kearns, still standing with the Glock in hand, now pointed at the pavement but still unholstered. Then to Miller, who was shifting from foot to foot like a man trying to stay invisible in plain sight. Hernandez didn't hesitate. "You," he said, pointing to the closest arriving officer, "get that weapon off him." "Now!" Kearns flinched. The order pierced whatever illusion he had been holding on to. His head snapped toward Hernandez, face twisted, confused. "What?" he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Wait, no." But the officer was already moving, hand on the weapon, slow and clear, not hostile, not aggressive, just decisive, trained. Kearns didn't resist, not really. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply stood there as the firearm was removed from his grip and tucked into an evidence bag. Then his wrists were pulled behind his back, and the handcuffs clicked in quick, practiced motion. Lauren watched without flinching. Kearns's lips moved, barely audible. "No, this isn't real," he muttered. "You can't." His voice cracked at the edge of disbelief, like a man waking from a dream only to realize it had always been a nightmare he created himself. Lauren spoke again, calm, but with the finality of someone used to giving orders that stuck. "Officer Jason Miller as well. He enabled this. Do it now." Miller looked like he might bolt. His eyes darted toward the roadside, toward the open darkness behind the highway shoulder, as if distance might undo what was unfolding. But 2 officers were already flanking him. He didn't protest, didn't speak, just let the cuffs slide over his wrists and looked straight at the ground. Lieutenant Hernandez turned toward Lauren, removing his cap as he did. His brow was furrowed, not with anger, but the quiet, tight grimace of a man already calculating how far the damage would reach. "Director, are you injured?" Lauren lowered her hands for the first time in what felt like hours. "No, not physically." Hernandez nodded, eyes scanning her wrist where the skin showed early signs of bruising. He didn't comment on it, he didn't need to. Andre was still filming. Across the road, silent, unmoving. His camera now pointed at the 2 cuffed officers, their uniforms muted by the flashing red and blue light show cutting through the night. Hernandez glanced toward him. "Is he with you?" Lauren shook her head. "He's the only reason this didn't end in tragedy." The lieutenant's face didn't move, but his throat flexed. "I'll need that footage," he said quietly. "You'll get it," Lauren replied. "So will Internal Affairs. So will the Justice Department." Hernandez took a half-step back. "Understood." A beat passed, then another. The scene was under control now, but the stillness wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, anticipatory. Everyone was waiting for the next move, the next word, the signal that this was no longer just a field incident. It was something more. Lauren didn't move toward Kearns, didn't address him, but she saw it. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was staring at the ground, jaw clenched, shoulders tight, still muttering to himself. "No, she's lying. It's a setup. She's not FBI." Lauren stepped forward now, just one step, close enough to be heard, not enough to provoke. "I showed you my credentials," she said. "Twice." Kearns didn't reply. "You ran the plates, you knew the car." Still nothing. "You pointed a weapon at a federal officer, you ignored protocol, you violated civil rights, and now you're in cuffs. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a record." He looked up, finally. His eyes were red, but not from tears, from disbelief. "You're not supposed to be able to do this," he said. "We get to walk away. We always walk away." Lauren's voice never wavered. "Not tonight." The officers led Kearns toward one of the cruisers. Miller followed, still silent, still watching the pavement like it might open and swallow him whole. Lauren turned to Hernandez. "Get them off this scene. I want them processed immediately, and I want the initial reports submitted before dawn." The lieutenant nodded, already motioning to his team. Lauren didn't stay to watch them get loaded into the vehicles. She didn't need to. The point had already been made. And for the first time since the lights first flashed behind her on that empty stretch of highway, she allowed herself to breathe. Not relief, not yet, because the real fight was just beginning. The metallic rattle of handcuffs tightening behind Kearns's back rang louder in his ears than the patrol car engines revving nearby. He resisted, not with his body, but with noise, an unraveling flurry of half-formed arguments and fragments of disbelief. "This is a mistake," he snapped, his voice sharp, cracking at the edges. "I didn't do anything wrong. I had every right. She was being aggressive." No one responded. The two officers flanking him remained silent, professional, guiding him toward the waiting cruiser like a package too unstable to carry without caution. Kearns' boots dragged slightly on the pavement as if he could anchor himself to the road and undo what had already happened. His mouth kept moving, spitting excuses into the cold night air, but no one was listening anymore. The authority he wore so comfortably minutes earlier had collapsed under its own weight, replaced now by the unmistakable posture of a man unaccustomed to consequences. Lauren watched without expression. She didn't need to speak. Everything that needed saying had already been captured, in Andre's footage, in her restraint, in Kearns's unraveling. Words weren't going to add clarity. Silence was sharper. Miller remained quiet as well. Hands cuffed behind his back, eyes fixed on the asphalt, he didn't say a word as he was led to the second cruiser. There was no fight in him, no defense, just the realization that he had followed someone straight into a disaster that now had official paperwork, a timestamp, and an audience. The crowd hadn't grown. No more bystanders had gathered. It was still just the units on scene, the cruisers humming in place, and the red and blue lights flickering over the shoulders of stunned officers now trying to reset the night into something manageable. But nothing about it could be returned to normal. They all knew that. Hernandez gave quiet instructions to a deputy, gesturing toward the cruisers and the evidence bags already being filled. Dash cams had been toggled back on. Radios were active, protocols now being followed to the letter. Lauren stepped slightly away from the line of vehicles, her breathing even but sharp. The pressure that had pressed against her chest for the last half hour hadn't lifted. It had only shifted, moved from personal threat to systemic weight. This wasn't just about one man with a badge and a temper. It was about how many like him still moved through the system unnoticed, unchecked, untouched. From the corner of her eye, she saw Andre cross the road. He moved slowly, not tentative, but with the deliberate pace of someone used to stepping into uncomfortable spaces. His phone was still recording, though now lowered slightly to his chest. The glow of the screen illuminated his face. Brown skin, square jaw, eyes locked on hers with an intensity that felt more like recognition than reverence. He stopped a few feet away, letting the silence hold for just a moment. Lauren met his gaze. "They did that to my brother," he said quietly, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Last year, outside a liquor store, same stance, same grip on the gun. Said he moved too fast." She said nothing. Andre didn't flinch. He died in the hospital the next day. There was no video, just the officer's word. A pause passed between them. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't emotional. It was factual, like a file being handed off between two people who already knew the story's ending but had to log it anyway. "They cleared him in 3 weeks," Andre added. "Still on duty." Lauren's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Andre glanced toward the cruisers where Kearns and Miller now sat cuffed in the back seats, lights pulsing over their faces through the rear windows. "This time," he said, "someone lived to say what happened." Lauren looked at him, really looked, not at his camera, not at his clothes, just him. And this time, she replied finally. Someone filmed it. Andre nodded once. He didn't say thank you. She didn't expect him to. Then he turned and walked back toward the shoulder of the road, where his vehicle sat idling in the dark. The phone remained in his hand, still recording, still documenting, as if turning it off might erase something they couldn't afford to lose. Lauren didn't watch him go. Instead, she turned away, her body moving on instinct now, away from the cruisers, away from the cluster of uniforms starting to untangle logistics and submit reports, away from Kearns's muffled voice, still muttering, "This can't be happening," like a prayer falling apart mid-sentence. She walked toward her car, still parked where it had all begun. The headlights were off now, the engine cold. The vehicle that once symbolized her rank and authority had become a monument to a system that had, for a moment, forgotten what those things were supposed to mean. As she stood at the edge of the driver's side door, her hand hovered near the handle. But she didn't open it. Not yet. The night wasn't finished with her. She stared down the highway, past the cruisers and the lights, past the wreckage of what had nearly been another name carved into headlines and memorial walls. She had stopped it, this time, but she knew it wasn't enough. Because, for every phone raised in time, how many weren't? For every witness brave enough to speak, how many stayed silent? This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. And everything that came next needed to be bigger than a roadside arrest. By 4:17 a.m., the video was everywhere. It started small. An anonymous post on Reddit with the caption, "This woman stayed calm while two cops lost control." The thread exploded. Within minutes, it was reposted to a subforum dedicated to police accountability, then cross-posted to our news and our public freakout. The comments came in waves, some outraged, some stunned, many asking the same question. Is this real? It didn't stay on Reddit for long. By 4:53, a Twitter account with over 200,000 followers shared a clipped version. 1 minute and 43 seconds of escalating tension. A Glock pointed, a voice off-screen yelling, "I'm recording this," and then the moment when backup arrived. The tweet had 30,000 retweets before sunrise. By 5:12, the video was trending under the tag Director Monroe. Most didn't know her title when the clip first hit, but someone dug into the plates, someone else matched her face to a bureau profile photo, and suddenly, it wasn't just about a woman on the side of the road. It was about the director of the FBI having a gun pointed at her by a patrol cop who hadn't bothered to ask her name. News aggregators picked it up next. BuzzFeed, The Daily Beast, then CNN and MSNBC. They hadn't verified everything yet, but they ran with the headline they knew would land hard. FBI director pulled over, held at gunpoint by local police. Civilian video raises federal alarm. The Department of Justice didn't wait for the networks to finish their segments. By 6:45, they had issued a formal statement confirming that a federal-level review had been authorized. An emergency task force would investigate the conduct of the officers involved, the circumstances of the stop, and whether any policies had been violated. Lauren hadn't seen any of it yet. At 7:03, she stepped off the elevator into the secure floor of the Bureau's D.C. headquarters, hair pulled back, dark blazer pressed, expression unreadable. She walked past the familiar rows of analysts and field liaisons who had been on site since before dawn. Conversations dropped to murmurs as she passed. No one greeted her. No one made eye contact. They all knew. Her phone buzzed as she entered her office. She didn't look at the screen. The double doors shut behind her with a mechanical thud. She didn't sit. Instead, she walked straight to her desk, reached for the keyboard, and pulled up her bureau email. The inbox blinked to life, flooded with unread alerts, flags, notices, subject lines she didn't bother with. One stood out. From Internal Secure at FBI.gov. Subject: Let it go, no greeting, no signature, no body text, just the subject line. She stared at it for a long moment, lips pressed together. Then she opened it. Still blank, nothing inside. She closed the message and deleted it. No hesitation. The room was silent except for the low hum of the security monitors embedded in the far wall. One of them displayed a muted news feed. Her face appeared on screen, side by side with the frozen image of Officer Kearns pointing a gun. The chyron read, "Federal fallout. FBI director faces traffic stop nightmare." She muted the screen completely. Then her phone rang. Private line. No ID. She let it buzz twice before picking up. "This is Monroe." "Director," a male voice said. Calm, practiced. "You've likely seen the news. I've seen the reaction. You caused quite a bit of it. I didn't post the video." "No," the voice agreed. "But you didn't stop it either." Lauren leaned back slightly, one hand resting on the edge of the desk. "Is there a specific point to this call?" A pause. Then, "The Bureau isn't built for this kind of attention. Internal exposure, yes. Public spectacle, no. We're being asked to manage optics, not disrupt them." Lauren said nothing. "You understand the pressure we're under right now," the voice continued. "Capital inquiries. Agency heads asking why they weren't looped in before Twitter. There are ways to handle this quietly, without dragging the Bureau into a larger media circus." "There's already a tent," she said, "and it's already on fire." The voice exhaled through the line. "We're requesting that you step back from the media response. Let our communications division handle the narrative. No more public comments. No press. Let this resolve internally." "You mean let it fade?" "I mean let it go." Lauren closed her eyes briefly, just long enough to steady the heat behind them. Not from emotion, from clarity. "If you're suggesting I remain silent while 2 armed officers nearly executed an unlawful stop on a sitting FBI director," she said, "you're not speaking to the right person." There was a pause. Not long, not defensive, just enough to acknowledge the line had been drawn. Then the call disconnected. She put the phone down gently. No slam, no drama. Her email pinged again. This time it was from the DOJ's Federal Oversight Division. The subject line, "Formal Coordination Request, Independent Review Team." She clicked it open. Inside were initial scheduling requests, a proposed investigator assignment list, and confirmation that both officers were already in administrative custody, pending formal charges. The final line of the message read, "We will need your full cooperation." She typed one line in response. "You have it." Then she pressed send. Her eyes returned to the security feed. The headline had changed. Now it read, "What happens when the system pulls the trigger on itself?" Lauren turned the screen off. She didn't need to watch it unfold. She was going to write it herself. The first official meeting began at 8:30 a.m. sharp. It was called as a routine operations briefing, but no one in the room believed that. Lauren walked in without a file, without a notepad, without anything but presence. The silence that followed her into the room wasn't procedural. It was political. The deputy director, Alan Hirsch, was already seated at the far end of the table. His expression unreadable, but posture stiff, as if each vertebra was balancing a separate concern. On his left sat Marla Jennings, Chief of Staff. On his right, Associate Director Whitaker, the Bureau's liaison to DOJ. Others followed: Internal Counsel, Public Affairs, and 3 senior administrators who hadn't said her name since the story broke. Lauren didn't wait for an opening. She took the seat at the head of the table and spoke before anyone could pretend this was a strategy session. "I'm aware of the memo being circulated," she said. "The suggestion that my actions are damaging the Bureau's public image. Let's be clear, I didn't create the problem. I exposed it. No one interrupted. She scanned the room. No one met her eyes. That confirmed it. The footage has been authenticated, she continued. The officers in question have been identified. DOJ is proceeding with an external review. Our job isn't to minimize the fallout. It's to ensure it never happens again. Hirsch cleared his throat. Director, there are broader implications. When the head of the Bureau becomes the center of a viral incident, especially involving uniformed officers, we're not just dealing with misconduct. We're dealing with erosion of public trust in law enforcement, in leadership, in the entire chain of command. Lauren leaned forward. Trust doesn't erode when we expose abuse. It erodes when we protect it. Jennings spoke next, voice smoother, more rehearsed. We're advising that all internal inquiries related to this event remain contained. That means no off-books interviews, no independent document pulls, no escalations without formal clearance. Lauren didn't blink. You're suggesting I stand down. We're suggesting you allow the agency to control the narrative, Whitaker added. Let DOJ lead the investigation. Internally, we regroup, manage the optics, and prepare a unified statement. Quiet confidence. Lauren stood. The movement was enough to silence even the controlled tones of the room. I'm not here to protect optics, she said. I'm here to protect integrity. If anyone around this table believes silence is the safer option, you're in the wrong building. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. She left the room. Within 30 minutes, she had assembled a smaller team, a unit she trusted. People who had earned their positions not through politics, but persistence. The Bureau's Anti-Corruption Task Force, mostly internal auditors and analysts who knew how to make connections where others saw bureaucracy. They gathered in a secure sub-level meeting room away from PR staff and high-traffic corridors. The lights were lower, the atmosphere different, not hostile, focused. She laid it out plainly. I want every traffic stop conducted by local law enforcement over the past 5 years where federal agents, employees, or contractors were involved in any capacity, she said, whether detained, cited, or released. Cross-reference against body cam data, dash cam uploads, incident reports, and internal complaints. A tech analyst, Marcus Hill, furrowed his brow. You're looking for patterns? I'm looking for ghosts, Lauren said. Incidents that never made it past a one-line entry. Stops that didn't get flagged because they were written off as minor. Stops that looked like mine, except no one filmed them. Another team member, Janet Liang, leaned forward. That's going to be thousands of records. Then start with regions, Lauren replied. Districts with high complaint volume, low internal follow-through. Filter by race and agency affiliation. I want to know how many times someone said they were federal and it didn't matter. Liang nodded. You want names? I want facts, Laurie said. The names will find themselves. No one objected. They got to work. While the rest of the Bureau fumbled with language to defend silence, Lauren built the mechanism to prevent it, not by pushing a statement, not by drafting a speech, but by tracing a pattern so large it couldn't be ignored. At 11:06 a.m., a notification popped up on her personal system. Unauthorized access attempt, case file ID, 83B7629, restricted. She tapped the alert. One of the flagged files from the regional server cluster in Georgia had been accessed, not by her team, by someone from internal oversight. She picked up the secure line. Pull access logs, she said. Find out who just tapped 83B7629. Cross it with anyone attached to interagency coordination protocols. 30 seconds later, Marcus called back. It's a legacy agent. Retired, but their clearance pinged through a backdoor login. Looks like someone used credentials that should have been wiped. Track the node. Flag the location and shut down further access. Already done. Lauren hung up. The pushback had started, not overtly, not with reprimands or warnings, but with ghost logins, with unseen hands reaching into the very files she had just told her team to examine. It wasn't just about silence anymore. It was about erasure. She turned back to the room. Encrypt all pulls. Back up to an external drive, local only. No cloud, no bureau servers. From this point forward, treat every file like it's about to disappear. Marcus nodded. You think someone's scrubbing? I know they are. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Because when the truth threatens to take down something bigger than one badge, silence becomes a strategy. And deletion, a weapon. By Thursday morning, the data was no longer anecdotal. It was definitive. Lauren stood at the head of the secure data room as the monitor flickered to life. The projection filled the wall. Graphs, timelines, keyword tags, heat maps. It wasn't just a collection of mistakes, it was a pattern. Across 5 years, 26 jurisdictions and multiple states, the numbers aligned with grim consistency. Over 400 traffic stops involving federal personnel, agents, field techs, analysts, contractors, had been flagged by Lauren's team as procedurally inconsistent. Most were labeled routine. None triggered internal reviews. Nearly all were left without any visual record. Dash cams inactive, body cams disabled, no secondary reports. And in 87% of those cases, the individuals stopped were black. Lauren stared at the data in silence as her team worked behind her. Janet Liang paced through the tagging schema, highlighting stops that occurred in areas with known high-density surveillance systems, yet yielded zero footage. Marcus Hill confirmed over a dozen login attempts from compromised credentials aimed at files the task force had already secured. The number of anomalies alone was damning. It's not just bias, Liang said, voice tight with disgust. It's omission. Deliberate. They knew where to look, Marcus added, and exactly what not to record. Lauren stepped forward, scanning the spreadsheet now laid out on the center table. Each row a name, a date, a badge number, a missing video file. An absence of accountability so precise it could only be maintained by routine. This was never about isolated officers, she said. It's infrastructure. She stepped back from the table and reached for the phone. The number she dialed wasn't internal, it was direct to Capitol Hill, not through media channels, not through PR intermediaries. She spoke clearly. This is Director Lauren Monroe. I need to speak to Chairwoman Reyes of the House Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee. It concerns systemic violations of federal personnel rights across multi-jurisdictional traffic stops. I have data that warrants immediate congressional review. There was no pushback. The response came 2 hours later. The chairwoman's office was coordinating emergency hearing logistics. Lauren was requested, to appear and present her findings in full. She agreed without hesitation. The confirmation email arrived just before noon. The subject line read, Testimony, Request, Bureau Director, Oversight Session on Procedural Abuse and Law Enforcement Accountability. Lauren forwarded it to her legal liaison, then closed the file. She turned back to her team, who had stopped what they were doing, watching her for direction. We're not just submitting this to the Hill, she said. We're compiling it for public record. Everything we present becomes official testimony. If anyone in this building tries to scrub it after the fact, it becomes evidence of obstruction. She paused. Double-check every case. Redact nothing. If a name needs protecting, get clearance. If it doesn't, let it stand. Janet tilted her head slightly. You're going public? Lauren nodded. With or without permission. There were no objections. The next 2 hours were consumed by preparation. Statements drafted. Data sets validated. They traced timelines, lined up reports with GPS metadata, identified field agents willing to corroborate their stories. One agent from Quantico had already reached out anonymously, saying his body cam malfunctioned twice during separate stops, and both times he was threatened when he announced his identity. Lauren marked his file for follow-up. At 2:47 p.m., a third party pinged her secure line, this time from the office of Representative Stephen Kell, a moderate Republican who had publicly distanced himself from federal reform efforts in the past. "We're hearing chatter from within DOJ," his aide said. "They're nervous about the scope. There's pressure to delay the hearing." Lauren's voice didn't shift. "It's not their hearing. Congressman Kell is concerned this could politicize the Bureau." "It already has," she said, "the moment they told me to let it go." There was no further argument. She ended the call and turned back to her desk. The screen in front of her displayed a heat map of Maryland, overlaid with red blips denoting stops within the last 12 months. She clicked one at random: Montgomery County. A black female field linguist stopped for a broken tail light. She was pulled from the vehicle, searched without a warrant, and released with no citation, no video. The officer's dash cam was under maintenance. Lauren added it to the list of testimony highlights. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment. Then she began typing. Opening statement. Judiciary Oversight by Director Lauren Monroe. What I encountered on that highway was not an anomaly. It was the culmination of years of normalized misconduct protected by layers of silence. My experience became public because someone had the courage to hit record. But my survival isn't a story about strength. It's a story about proximity to power. Most of the individuals represented in this data didn't have that proximity. They had only fear. And for many, that fear was justified. She stopped there, not to edit, to breathe. Then she kept writing. By 5 p.m., her office was dark except for the light of the monitor and the glow of her second phone, a secured agency line that she had diverted for media alerts. A ping came in. CNN. Breaking. FBI director to testify before Congress on law enforcement misconduct. This is infrastructure. Lauren didn't react. She just saved the file and closed her laptop. The room was silent before she even entered. The kind of silence that didn't invite tension but enforced it. Not a murmur from the aides. Not a cough from the rows of press lining the back wall. Not even the usual shuffling of papers from congressional staffers pretending to multitask. When Lauren Monroe walked into the House Judiciary Oversight hearing chamber, the silence wasn't one of anticipation. It was one of reckoning. The seal of the United States glared down behind the dais, high above the wood-paneled wall. A row of microphones, water pitchers, and notepads stretched across the front. The members of the subcommittee sat in their designated chairs, some with brows furrowed in concern, others already leaning back in cautious neutrality. At the center, Chairwoman Lila Reyes, sleeves rolled, glasses low on her nose, waited with the calm that came from knowing exactly how serious this was. Lauren took her seat at the witness table. No legal team beside her, no support staff in her shadow, just a binder filled with files, a USB drive containing 400 incidents, and a truth that had finally run out of places to hide. C-SPAN's red recording light glowed on the far wall. Chairwoman Reyes tapped the mic. "This hearing is now in session. Director Monroe, thank you for appearing today." Lauren nodded once. "Thank you for the opportunity. You may proceed with your statement." Lauren opened the binder, but didn't look down. "My name is Lauren Monroe. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On March 4th, at approximately 9:43 p.m., I was pulled over by a local patrol officer while driving on a federal route outside Baltimore. I had committed no violation. I was not speeding. My vehicle was registered to the Bureau. The dash cam was disabled. My identification was dismissed. I was ordered out of the car, physically restrained, and held at gunpoint for several minutes before backup arrived. The incident only de-escalated when a civilian bystander began recording on his phone. There was no reaction from the room, only attention, focused, sharp. I have no doubt that if that recording had not existed, we would not be here today. The official report would have noted a routine stop. My objections would have been redacted, minimized, buried in procedural justifications. She reached for the USB drive and held it up. But this is not about one night. Not anymore. My team has reviewed 5 years of procedural traffic stops involving federal personnel. We found over 400 documented incidents where officers used unlawful methods. Stops with no legal justification, no recording, no citations issued, and in many cases, no written explanation. 87% of those involved black or brown federal employees. None of those incidents triggered investigations. Murmurs swept the room, brief but unavoidable. Lauren continued. These were not misunderstandings. They were patterns. The same tactics, the same gaps in oversight, the same silence afterward. She paused, just long enough to make them sit with it. I didn't survive because the system worked, she said. I survived because someone refused to look away. The words hung in the chamber like smoke, visible, unmistakable, inescapable. Reyes leaned forward, voice even. Director Monroe, are you saying this is a systemic failure? Lauren looked at her directly. I'm saying the system functions exactly as designed when it protects misconduct. I'm saying the problem isn't rogue officers, it's structured permissibility, the absence of mandatory oversight, the tolerance of invisible intimidation. If the director of the FBI can be subjected to that level of disregard on a public road, what happens to the people who don't have titles, who don't have power, who don't survive? No one spoke. Reyes nodded once. You've submitted all supporting documentation. I have, Lauren replied. All records have been verified, timestamps logged, digital evidence cataloged and secured by third-party encryption. Every case is traceable, every omission accounted for. Representative Kell cleared his throat. Director Monroe, some of my colleagues are concerned this may be an overreach, that you're using your position to advance a political stance rather than an institutional correction. Lauren didn't blink. Justice isn't political. Silence is. The room stilled again. Reyes turned toward her staff, whispered something into a mic, then addressed the gallery. The subcommittee will take a 10-minute recess to review the initial data files. Lauren remained seated as members rose, left the table, conferred in tight knots near the back corners of the chamber. She didn't shift, didn't sip water, just waited. She had done her part. 10 minutes turned to 15, then 20. When the gavel hit again, the room had changed. Reyes leaned in. Director Monroe, based on preliminary findings, this committee is initiating a recommendation for legislative review. We are requesting the draft of a bill that will establish mandatory camera activation for all patrol stops involving federal vehicles, mandatory federal reporting of officer-civilian interactions involving badge identification, and an independent oversight board to investigate misconduct tied to interagency coordination. We will also consider whistleblower protections for federal employees reporting local abuse. Lauren nodded. I'll provide whatever support is needed. You already have, Reyes said. Lauren stood, collected her binder, and thanked the panel. As she turned to leave, She saw two young aides at the back of the room whispering while reviewing the footage again. One of them looked up, meeting her eyes for a brief moment. There was no awe in the expression, just respect, and something harder to define. Relief, maybe. Outside the chamber, reporters shouted her name. Flashbulbs fired, questions flew. She didn't stop. She walked past the press, past the security, past the stairwells lined with history. Not faster, just steady, deliberate. She had survived. But more importantly, now the system had to answer for why. The Monroe Act was introduced 3 days after the hearing. It moved faster than most legislation of its kind, driven by public demand and political pressure that didn't wait for committees to catch their breath. The bill's language was clear, unflinching. It mandated continuous audio-visual recording for all patrol traffic stops conducted by any law enforcement agency receiving federal funding. Cameras could not be disabled, paused, or obstructed without disciplinary consequences. All footage was to be uploaded to an encrypted, independent archive within 30 minutes of the stop. Officers found to have violated these protocols would face immediate suspension pending review. Repeat violations would result in decertification. There was no room for gray area. It was named not because Lauren asked for it, but because the moment demanded a name that already carried weight. When the bill's title was announced on the floor, the Monroe Act, Federal Standards for Officer Accountability and Recording Compliance, the response outside the chamber was immediate. Civil rights organizations applauded it. Former federal agents came forward in op-eds describing their own experiences with unlawful stops. Retired judges voiced support. Tech experts from academic institutions offered to help design the storage systems and verification algorithms. But inside the walls of influence, resistance was already forming. The National Police Coalition issued a carefully worded statement within hours of the bill's proposal, calling the legislation hasty and reactionary. The Fraternal Order of Enforcement Professionals warned that it would erode officer discretion and compromise the split-second judgment critical to street safety. Smaller police unions began lobbying state representatives quietly, asking them to stall the bill, citing budget constraints, equipment malfunctions, and the need for procedural flexibility. Lauren received a full memo outlining the lobbying timeline, unofficial talking points, and pressure campaigns already being organized in 3 states. She read it without surprise. She'd expected the opposition. What caught her attention wasn't what the unions were saying. It was who they were coordinating with. The same administrative offices that had once cautioned her not to escalate. The same middle-tier advisors who'd whispered about public optics and protecting the Bureau. Now, they were meeting with union leaders in closed-door sessions. She didn't react. She delegated. Janet Liang coordinated with 2 oversight nonprofits to host an open-source data panel comparing states with mandatory camera policies to those without. Marcus Hill secured a provisional contract with a software firm specializing in tamper-proof metadata chains for video uploads. Lauren signed off on both without hesitation. Momentum had to be protected like evidence, documented, time-stamped, immune to interference. At the same time, she refused all television interviews. Her message had already been delivered. She didn't need to repeat it in sound bites. But the calls kept coming. Late one night, her phone rang again. Private number. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. Monroe. A voice responded. Familiar, steady, quiet. Didn't think you'd pick up. Lauren leaned against the edge of her desk. Andre, I figured this number wasn't still active. I keep it open for people who matter. There was a pause on the line. Not awkward, just real. I saw the hearing, he said. Saw the bill, too. Did you expect it? No, he replied, but I hoped. Lauren didn't say anything right away. She let him talk. They're already pushing back, he said. I got friends in a couple precincts. Some are scared, others are furious. But the ones who've got something to hide, they're the loudest. I know. Another pause. You good? He asked, and there was something in the way he said it, not just concern, but shared understanding. The kind that came from witnessing the same fire from different sides of the street. Lauren looked out the window of her office. D.C. glowed faintly under cloud cover. Everything outside seemed still, like the city itself was holding its breath. "I'm not good," she said, "but I'm not stopping." He chuckled softly. "That's close enough." Then, quieter. "My brother would have liked you." Lauren closed her eyes for a second, just long enough to feel the weight behind the words. "I'm sorry he's not here." "So am I," Andre said. "But I think you're doing something he didn't get the chance to." "What's that?" "Rewrite how this ends." Neither of them spoke for a while after that. Lauren finally broke the silence. "The footage you shot, it changed everything." "I didn't do it for the Bureau," he said. "I know. I did it because I was tired of seeing names I couldn't save." Lauren looked down at the desk, at the file marked Monroe Act, Draft 3-0, still open to the final clause on record retention and public access. "You saved one," she said. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Before hanging up, Andre left her with one final thought. They're gonna come harder now. Not just at you, at everything connected to this. The system doesn't go quiet when it's wounded. It gets louder. "I'm counting on that," Lauren replied. The line clicked dead. She set the phone down, walked across the room, and began preparing her next brief. The conversation should have ended with strategy. That's how these things usually go. Statements, timelines, coordination. But Andre had paused on the other end of the line, just long enough that Lauren knew he wasn't finished. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded with something more personal, more brutal. Then he said it. "They don't do that to people like you, not usually, but for us, it's just Tuesday." Lauren sat perfectly still in her office chair, hand resting near the mouse pad, but not moving. The lights were dimmed, the building quiet. Most of her staff had gone home, and the hum of the HVAC system was the only sound left in the room. But Andre's voice was louder than anything she heard all day. She didn't respond right away. She couldn't, because in that single sentence, everything she'd been trying to frame in legal terms, policy, oversight, accountability, collapsed into something raw. Andre hadn't raised his voice. He didn't accuse her. He didn't have to. His words weren't meant as a condemnation. They were a confirmation, and she knew it. Lauren had stood before Congress with certainty. She had faced down two officers on the side of a dark highway and walked away with composure intact. She had taken calls from senators, cabinet members, and international press without flinching. But this was the first time she felt something she couldn't control press in on her from the inside. Survival, she realized, had always been a moving target, one that changed depending on your last name, your zip code, your skin. She was not immune, but she had been protected by position, by platform, by the presence of a single camera held steady by a stranger who shouldn't have had to intervene at all. And now that stranger was reminding her why he had. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, not broken, not shaken, just stripped down. "I know," she said quietly. It wasn't enough. It never would be, but it was honest. Andre didn't say anything after that. There was nothing left to clarify. The truth had already been laid bare. It wasn't about the stop, or the badge, or the law. It was about what the law refused to see until someone like her forced it to look. The call ended with no goodbye. She stared at her reflection in the blackened screen of her laptop for several long seconds. Then she stood. By morning, the announcement was drafted. She spent 3 hours working with her policy team, legal advisors, and 2 external advocacy groups to finalize the structure. It would not be part of the Bureau. It would not be under DOJ supervision. It would not be staffed by retired law enforcement or shaped by political appointees. That was non-negotiable. The Office for Civilian Oversight of Traffic Enforcement, OCOT, would operate independently. Its mandate: monitor compliance with the Monroe Act, review all civilian complaints involving traffic stops, audit camera footage, and maintain public access to aggregate misconduct data. The most critical piece: every member of the board would be civilian. Lauren insisted on it. The oversight agency would be empowered to subpoena footage, compel testimony, and recommend disciplinary action directly to state departments, with federal funding tied to compliance. If a department refused, it would lose federal grants immediately. There would be no exceptions. She knew the backlash would be swift, but she also knew what Andre had said wasn't just true, it was lived, and lived truth demanded systems that no longer asked permission to believe it. The press release was simple. FBI Director Lauren Monroe announces independent civilian oversight office to enforce Monroe Act compliance and protect citizens during traffic stops. The statement that followed was shorter than most expected. Laws are not enough. Oversight is not enough. What we need is presence, civilian presence, independent, untouchable, unfiltered presence. OCOT will ensure that what happened on that highway is not reduced to headlines and hashtags. It will become the standard of what must never happen again. The press lit up immediately. One network called it the most aggressive move toward civilian authority and federal law enforcement oversight in 2 decades. Another labeled it unconstitutional. A third called it the beginning of a necessary national shift. Lauren didn't respond to commentary. She didn't appear on camera. She went back to work. Within 48 hours, offices were allocated in D.C., Atlanta, and Chicago. Recruitment began through public channels and nonprofit partnerships. Background checks were rigorous. No ties to law enforcement, no ties to political PACs, no history of bias complaints. She selected a temporary director, Kendra Tolson, a former civil rights attorney and child of a man wrongfully detained during a roadside stop in 1994. When reporters asked why she didn't put a federal official in charge, Lauren replied with one sentence: accountability doesn't come from within. That night, she walked the quiet corridor of the Bureau's 7th floor, alone, her heels echoing faintly on the polished tile. She didn't look out the windows. She didn't glance at the sealed office doors or the portraits of former directors lining the hall. She already knew what they thought. She knew some would never forgive her for taking the fight outside the walls of the institution they all swore to defend. But she also knew something else. If it took breaking tradition to rebuild trust, so be it. OCOT would open within 60 days. And for the first time in her career, Lauren Monroe wasn't waiting for approval. Lauren Monroe stood alone at the podium, without the Bureau seal, without a political backdrop, just her, a microphone, and a message the country was about to hear. This morning, she began, I'm announcing the creation of the Office of Traffic Justice, an independent civilian agency tasked with monitoring, investigating, and enforcing lawful conduct by police officers during traffic stops across the United States. It wasn't just another reform, it was a shift in power. The OTJ would not operate under the Department of Justice. It would not be managed by law enforcement veterans. Its board would be composed entirely of civilians. And it would have authority, real authority, to audit footage, review complaints, impose penalties, and restrict funding from any department that failed to comply with national accountability standards. No more malfunctioning body cams. No more missing dashcam footage. No more discretionary silence. This isn't about punishing police, Lauren said. It's about protecting the public. It's about ensuring no person, no matter their race, badge, or position, faces a gun without record, without reason, and without recourse. Reporters fired questions, but she stayed firm. How is this different? Because it doesn't ask for trust, she answered. It demands evidence. She closed the briefing with a line that would appear in every major paper the next morning. The system doesn't change because of the truth. It changes when there's nowhere left to hide from it. And the reaction was immediate. Civil rights groups praised the move. Police unions condemned it. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle scrambled to define their position. But while others debated, Lauren kept moving. That evening, she agreed to one final televised interview, a national broadcast. No scripts, no rehearsed statements. The interviewer asked, "Do you believe this is enough?" Lauren looked directly into the camera. "No," she said, "but it's a start, and it's the first step toward a system that answers not just to power, but to the people." Lauren Monroe sat before the camera. No backdrop, no title card, just truth. Her voice was calm, but every word landed with purpose. "I didn't survive because the system worked," she said. "I survived because someone refused to look away." She described the night on the highway not as an anomaly, but as a reflection of what happens when power goes unchecked. She didn't speak for sympathy. She spoke for the ones who never got the chance. Then came the question, the one that broke through politics and policy. If it was your daughter in that car, would you still stay silent? She let the silence answer. Then the message appeared across the screen. Share this message. Speak up. Make justice impossible to ignore. The video went viral. But more than that, it reached people. Not as outrage, but as a mirror. Lauren left the set without fanfare. No slogans, no applause, just a final truth. Justice doesn't happen in silence. It happens when people refuse to look away. And as the cameras faded and the headlines rolled in, one thing became clear. Lauren Monroe didn't just change policy, she changed the conversation. The Office of Traffic Justice was no longer an idea. It was a reality, built not on promises, but on proof that silence was no longer an option. But this story isn't just about a director or a law. It's about all of us, about who gets protected, who gets recorded, and who gets heard. So, here's the question. If justice knocked on your door, would you speak up or stay silent? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's make sure the next time the lights flash behind someone, the truth is already watching.